Good morning, friends. Thanks for joining here at Journey Home Meditation this morning for the morning sit. We're going to be sharing some space together this morning, doing a little breathing practice, some meditation practice, and some contemplation and a little poetry. Maybe not in that order, but I am very happy to be here in whatever order it arrives. Okay. Let's just take a few breaths together. Breathing in through the nose to the bottom of the belly. You may want to adjust your body slightly just to be aware of how the breath is moving in and out of the body. Sometimes a little adjustment can bring our awareness and our attention there. So, breathing in. You know, one of the things that I've learned over the time of my practice, that subtlety is really important. It's more important than sometimes the gross things. And when I say gross, I mean like the larger things, the more obvious, obtuse things. In fact, if you talk to like a body work professional, you know, a massage therapist, a chiropractor, a physical therapist, somebody, occupational therapist, maybe, they'll most likely tell you that it's the subtle shifts in things like our posture or the way that we move to pick something up or move to do anything. It's the subtle changes, the very small things that end up having the largest outcome over time. And I like to think of this, I recall, and I've talked about this in the past on this program, I'm sure, because it's kind of a center point. One of those foundations of my personal practice is understanding what happens at the fulcrum and how that affects the outcome the farther away you get. And I remember learning in 7th grade from Mr. Sears, Peter Sears, Mr. Sears. He was both our English teacher, our math teacher, and our football coach at the very small rural school that I attended in junior high in Bradford, Ohio. And one of the things that we worked on in that class was figuring out the movement at the center of a clock on the hand of a clock versus the movement at the end, and how much farther the movement at the end of a clock is than the movement at the center. So we're doing the radius of and the circumference of a circle, you know, figuring out those things. And we imagined as a class what it would be like if you had a clock that was a mile long, had a hand on a clock that was a mile long. How fast would the end of that hand move to complete its cycle in 24 hours? And or in 60 minutes. You know, we had all the different equations, and it was just an interesting experiment in understanding movement. And for some reason that stuck with me when I started doing my practice. I began meditating, and I began intentional breath work, and I began body work, yoga, qigong, these practices. I began to understand that the tiny movements in my life, the tiny shifts that I could make, would be effective at a distance. If each morning I started getting out of my bed when I first woke up, and I started making that tiny shift in the from spending 10 minutes lying in bed, ruining the day, to getting out of bed and moving my body, doing my hygiene and drinking a glass of water in the same amount of time, 10 minutes, that tiny shift would actually start playing out throughout my day. Um, I would recognize the days that I spent that 10 minutes preparing myself, moving my body, having consciousness be a part of that action. 6 hours later, I wouldn't be as tired. I wouldn't be grumpy. And I recognized that the counter of that was true. When I would stay in bed and lounge around, I would drag more in my day. And I started thinking back to Mr. Sears and that lesson of that little bit of shift in the center is a large shift on the other side. And it really applies well to the practice that we're doing, because the practice that we're doing is really a subtle practice. And it may create large shifts and changes in your life. It may create large changes in your body, but the practice begins with subtlety. It begins with just a little bit of shift. And I think that we live in a culture that wants radical change immediately. So we have, diet pill fads and injections and all of these things that promise, you'll lose all this weight in this short amount of time, or you'll gain all of this energy in just one dose of our magical elixir, and you'll be performing at 300% of your normal, all these things, right? And we know that this has been happening for forever, right? There's been snake oil salesmen, and there's been promises, pie in the sky promises made by someone with an agenda for a long time. But when we slow down and we see how that fast movement isn't always the healthiest, and it's not sustainable, and it doesn't last, we find that we're chasing after these rainbows, uh, these things that will continue, and we're never going to catch them. So, but we idolize them, right? We idolize this end result. Uh, and we are unable to see the changes that it's making in our immediate present moment. Like, for instance, there may be side effects of some of these drugs or treatments that may be really detrimental to our relationships and our feelings in the moment, but we have our eyes on this prize at the end. So we do these large steps, these large changes, and we end up swinging back on that pendulum to where we began. And sometimes even more unhealthy, because we've had such an absence of presence of moment and gratitude for who we are and what we are in that process, that we punish ourselves on the other side. I have been a person who dedicates myself to a really disciplined workout regimen. I go to the gym every day, for 3 months, and I'm down 20 pounds and my strength is up and I'm feeling really good. But I'm also starting to recognize that I'm not allowing myself to feel not so good. I'm not allowing myself to feel tired. I'm not allowing myself to feel unmotivated. When I start to feel those things, I beat myself up emotionally. I feel guilt and shame. I start to feel these feelings of discomfort that are so strong that my built-in coping mechanisms that I have practiced aren't large enough, and then I crash because I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed psychologically. I'm overwhelmed emotionally. And I'm starting to recognize now that, a subtle change can actually be quite effective. Like the fulcrum, that center point that everything turns around. A subtle shift there is a massive shift on the other end. So maybe picturing that mile long minute hand on the clock, and the amount of distance that minute hand moves on one end versus how it moves at the fulcrum, at the center. I read a poem this morning that kind of spoke to this in my mind. It got my mind moving on this subtle shift idea. And I want to share it. But maybe before... Yeah, let's go ahead and do the poem now, and then we'll have some meditative practice together. We can meditate on this poem. This is Mary Oliver, and this is from her book Blue Iris. It was published in 2004, and you can find it in the volume 2 of the New and Selected Poems by Mary Oliver. If you have listened to these morning sits for any amount of time, you probably have heard a few poems by Mary Oliver make their way in, because she's definitely one of the teachers that I turn to often. And for some reason, especially in the mornings when I'm, turning on the kettle to prepare tea in the morning or coffee, I'll sit down with a Mary Oliver book, and it always has this ability to enrich my perspective. It enriches it. It gives me just enough pause and just enough reverence for the simple existence that I feel wealthy in that moment. I see myself just surrounded by wealth. And this poem really highlights that for me. It's called How Would You Live Then? What if 100 rose-breasted grosbeaks flew in circles around your head? What if the mockingbird came into the house with you and became your advisor? What if the bees filled your walls with honey and all you needed to do was ask them and they would fill the bowl? What if the brook slid downhill just past your bedroom windows so you could listen to its slow prayers as you fell asleep? What if the stars began to shout their names or to run this way and that way above the clouds? What if you painted a picture of a tree and the leaves began to rustle and a bird cheerfully sang from its painted branches? What if you suddenly saw that the silver of water was brighter than the silver of money? What if you finally saw that the sunflowers, turning toward the sun all day and every day, who knows how, but they do it, were more precious, more meaningful than gold? Breathing in and out. In I think that poem, for me, really speaks to the notion of wealth in a way that we don't often think of wealth in this culture, and it challenges it directly when it talks about the silver of water is brighter than the silver of money, or that the gold of the sunflowers is more precious and more meaningful than gold. And for me, this is a real calling to awareness and presence in the moment. When we can take those few breaths and we can practice that breathing, when we can practice the subtlety of shifting just a little bit, bringing the shoulder blades together just a touch in the back, and we're not stretching our backs fully open for the breathing practice, we're just slightly opening, and you can do that really simply by facing your palms upwards on your lap or on the arms of your chair, or however it is you're sitting, but facing the palms upwards rotates the shoulders just enough to start to open that chest. And that subtle movement makes such a large difference in your breathing that if you can practice that, you can start to incorporate that into your posture daily as you move through the world. You can, when you become aware of it, open those palms, open that chest. You'll find that you're breathing easier. And as we breathe easier, we're relaxing our bodies. We're sending messages to our bodies that we're safe, we're calm, and that lowers our cortisol levels, our stress comes down, lowers our adrenaline, our aggressiveness comes down, our reactivity shifts and changes. We become less volatile or toxic because we are not engaging from a place of defensiveness. Subtle shifts. So then we start to do that and we're breathing calm. And then as we're sitting and we're breathing calm and our body finds calm, we're finding peace, we can start to appreciate the way that the sun hits the yellow pillar in front of my building, and it casts this slight amber hue, this golden amber hue into the front window. And it's very subtle, but it's there. And it's only there for a bit at a certain time of day when the sun is at a certain angle. But recognizing that fills me with a little bit of joy in that moment. And it gives me a sense of place and a sense of familiarity that I wouldn't have otherwise. That's wealth. I'm finding the abundance of that which brings me comfort, joy, kindness, love. That's true wealth. As opposed to thinking about the one, I will be happy when I have enough money, when I acquire enough things, then I'll be happy. When I pay off my house, then I'll be happy. When I can retire from the job I work at for 40 years and get my retirement checks, and I'm old and I have safety and security, that's when I'll relax. But there's the difference in wealth and the chase for finances is that a wealthy person doesn't need money. Right? You think about the wealthiest people when we're considering finances, they don't need money. They think they do. They probably do everything they can to continue to acquire because it comes with a certain level of sickness once we start hoarding resources in that way. Billionaires, I think, could really benefit from these practices and learning how to let go. But aside from that, the definition that I have of wealth is one who doesn't need money. And as I sit and I breathe calmly, yes, of course we need money to pay our bills. Yes, of course we need the basics of life. Yes, of course we deserve to have food and shelter and clothing. Everyone does. This is not about the things that we require as humans. This is about the concept of feeling like you don't have enough in any moment is something that you can shift. It can shift. Oftentimes, these ideas are used for spiritual bypassing to get people in poverty and poor people to not pay attention to the economic injustices of our world. And that's not at all the perspective that I take on this. Um, but when you recognize where your wealth comes from, you will be there and be present for it, and you will tend to it, and you will care for it. And when you know that the silver of the water is worth more than the silver of money, you will care for that water. You will tend to it. You will protect it. When you love the sunflowers, when you love the air that you breathe, when you love the breeze on your face, when you love the place in which you are, you will be present. You will tend to it. You will care for it. You will protect it. And that includes being present in your own body. You love your own body when you understand the wealth of your own existence. You'll protect it. You'll care for it. You'll love it. And you'll be more than willing to share it. You'll share your love. You'll share your joy. That's where I'm at on that. And I'm happy about that right now. So thank you, Mary Oliver, for that lovely poem. Once again, the title of the poem is How Would You Live Then? From Blue Irises, and I took it from the New and Selected Poems, Volume 2. Well, let's have just a few moments of silent space together. And may I find happiness. May I find peace. May I find joy. May I find love today. And may you find happiness. May you find peace. May you find joy. And may you find love today. And may all beings find happiness. May all beings find peace. May all beings find joy, and may all beings be love today. It's good to be able to be here with this practice together. Feel free to message me, leave comments, engage. Part of this practice is encouraging one another to, this is not a top-down practice. This is not, I don't want this to be a monologue. I want this to be a dialogue, a conversation. And that's how we enrich one another. So engage if you can. Leave comments. Find us on Substack, Journey Home Meditation on Substack, and start engaging there with us. Let's create something larger than ourselves. In the meantime, be well. Hariom.